Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Week 17 episode of the Talk-On Show, where we are professionally unprofessional, consistently inconsistent, and always objectively correct. Today, we're going to be talking about the final playoff selection. And without further ado, let me introduce myself, Broke Gundy, aka Brother Cam, and I have with me my co-host, Texas Donuts, aka Brother Chase.
Too much glaze, too much glaze, too much glaze.
All right. Yeah, it's a lot of glaze.
I was going to say that is this is a tribute to the massive amount of, I think, overhype that Texas has gotten in general.
Don't explain it yet. We'll get to that, man. We'll get.
Well,
to
I mean, we're going to get to it, but yeah. So we got hopefully an actual short episode. We say that all the time, but we are
actually going to have it. It doesn't matter. It's going to be the shortest episode we've ever done. I'm telling you, folks, we're going to do it this time, and you're going to watch the whole thing, or else you're just an L. Okay.
Well, we got one quick thing to go through because we've actually finally gotten some responses on some of our shorts and
some
other
engagement.
videos. So we've got some
engagement.
engagement.
We like it. We like the engagement.
We'll address some of that engagement. Just because the engagement's nice, but there were some things a little lost in translation for the engagement. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about the Texas Glaze. But I think that's going to kind of fall in line with the CFP bracket speak. We're pretty much just doing our reaction to the CFP bracket. I know it's super late, but I'm a busy guy.
We're professionals. Okay, so I guess I'll start off because my face and voice was the main one throughout the kind of flow on YouTube.
Well, what's funny is that you've recently shown the most Notre Dame maliciousness lately, but I started very early with it, and it's just been kind of a common theme. But
well, we'll both, which that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Notre Dame hate speech. We're gonna level the playing field because, and we are very much appreciate the people who watched and commented. Even though they were disagreeable on some things, we like the engagement. It's what it's all about. So
no, I mean everybody has it. We all have the right. We love seeing. We would love to see more people engage and say everything. Obviously, we're always objectively correct. So whatever you say is going to be wrong if you're disagreeing with us. It's just how it is.
Get over it. Just get over it.
But no, we definitely want some engagement and do what we can. We're trying to address what we can during shows because I don't think that going back and forth on a comment section is always that good because you can never truly translate things just right.
That's not the way to do it. But I mean, I'm not going to do that anyway because I'm a man. I'm 40. I don't have time for you broke folks. Okay.
Oh yeah, I guess you should explain your name, the Broke Gundy thing.
I don't want to have to explain it. I think we kind of ruin it when we explain it. I think they get it. If you know, you know.
Yeah, if you know, you know. Okay.
And it's like a double play too, because it is a callback to episode 1, because I did reference the same person in episode 1.
Did do
as my persona. So anyway,
so we've come full circle right before the playoff.
Notre Dame hate speech. Okay. So we'll get this out the way. Let's level the playing field. So Notre Dame, we talked a lot of crap about Notre Dame and their schedule and yada, yada, yada. And I remembered, hope we don't get copyright strike for that. You're not supposed to say that 3 times in a row. It's like the magic curse. Thanks, Seinfeld. Anyway, yada, yada. We talked about their schedule, crapped on their schedule and stuff. And I mean, I exaggerated and said and honestly, I will admit my mistake. I thought that they had scheduled 5 or 6 group of 5 games throughout their season. I was wrong about that. It was actually 4 out of their 12 games were group of 5. So they did play 8 power conference teams. Still doesn't qualify as the same as a meaningful, consistent conference schedule that other teams play. And we can talk about that more, I guess. But But I did a little exaggerating, a little incorrectness on that. But so I admit where I was wrong on that. I still think their schedule is typically weak.
I
I
mean, they're
still
pretty
think
much
they,
just group of 5 teams that are in power conferences anyways, so and not to mention they're
yeah,
also
more or less.
beaten up on those who defend our country, so that's they should be
I don't
ashamed
know
of
how
that.
long we're going to take that. How long are we going to take that?
Yeah, how
Um,
long are we gonna let the Irish beat up on
I mean,
our,
look,
soldiers?
besides Georgia Tech and Texas A&M, I don't really see any kind of really competitive opponent that they played. But let me just lay it down because look, they're a good team. Notre Dame is a good team. I believe they're a good team. I don't think they're a bad team. I think Marcus Freeman's a good coach. Uh,
Well, pause
I
for a
honestly
second.
believe he's in
I
uh,
think
it. Uh,
I think what we should say is what I think is what we think they're a good team. Emphasis on think, because I also don't think that there's enough evidence they've played good enough teams to be 100% certain that they're a
there
great
you
team. And
go.
that's where things got lost in translation. I don't in any way think that they're a bad team. They're not. They beat up on Georgia Tech, who was a good team. Granted, it was earlier in the season, but and they also beat Texas A&M again first game of the season. But the thing is that
Excuse
they're
me.
just I just don't. I want to believe they're a good team. Funny enough, because I am sick and tired. They're in the playoffs again. I'm sick and tired of them getting beat up in the playoffs and in the postseason. I want to see Notre Dame do good because I want to see good playoff games. But they they go through the easiest independent schedule ever. Key thing that's a big thing we talked about was independent scheduling, because they can just schedule. Their conference doesn't schedule it for them. They schedule whatever games they want, and they can do whatever they want. And I'm sorry, people can say what they want. They literally only scheduled 2 teams with the intention of them being good, and that was USC and A&M, and neither of those teams were going into that with a better record than like 8-4 going into this season. So like Texas A&M is right off a new coach, and USC Lincoln Riley has just
Yeah,
crapped the bed with
they've
USC.
they've
So
been there. Yeah, they've been USC.
So I don't know where anybody gets that. Oh, well, Notre Dame tried to schedule some good teams. No, they didn't. They did not. They didn't try and schedule any good teams. They scheduled Navy and Army, and they beat up on Navy, beat up on Army, and then Navy goes and beats up on Army. They're not great teams. They're just not. Army and Navy aren't good teams. They play in a crappy
Not
conference.
not in the like no, not in like top 25
And not to
conversations.
mention that, and I was really low on Notre Dame because of the upset, and upsets do happen. So I was really crapping on them because of the
Yeah.
Northern Illinois game. But I think
And
the
see,
overall
later in the
point,
season, we didn't hold that. We didn't hold that as the be all end all to their season. We didn't hold that against them because upsets happen. That's their only loss. But the rest of their schedule is just not. We think they're a good team, as Texas Donuts mentioned. We just don't know how good they really are because they don't play a
right,
crucible schedule that defines that. Because we've all, I think we've touched on it before. If we haven't, we'll say it now. The best teams, uh, title contenders specifically, are forged in a crucible of a schedule. Like if you don't play the best competition or at least top competition consistently through your season, you're not going to be ready to win it all. So and Notre Dame just hasn't done that. And historically, in the past 20 years or so, that's why they've just never been up to task in the
right.
playoffs and in the BCS title game because they play a weak schedule. Um,
That's my
and
thing.
I'll
Is like
just and
you
we
can't just you can't.
and they do it on purpose because it's a brand. It's the brand bias. Um, and it's not so much that we hate on Notre Dame specifically. It's the brand bias. It's it's the treatment that Notre Dame gets because of their historic brand name. And I mean, Notre Dame, here's the thing, and some people in the comments were talking about, well, who's supposed to make their schedule? They're independent. They have to make their own schedule. Well, yeah, that's the point. They
That's
choose to
our
be
problem
independent
with it, is that they make their own
so that
schedule.
they can make their own
Right.
schedule. That's why they choose to be independent, so
And
they can
and
make their own
right.
schedule
And the problem with that
for
is
obvious
that the
reasons.
situation like this is that people are talking about, that's kind of my point, is that, that's another thing we saw. It's like, okay, well, what other teams would you put above Notre Dame? You're right. I think that Notre Dame, among this huge like playoff selection, that it's kind of hard to put anybody above them in the playoffs. I don't think they have any
It's
right
hard to
being at
argue
7.
that.
I don't think they have any right at being at 7. I think they need to be the ride-in that's at 12 or whatever, the auto bid or whatever. I think they should be at the bottom at 12, not Clemson. But I digress. But that's just because I think it's not it's not that I don't think Notre Dame's a great team, or it's not that I don't think that they're a good team or whatever. It's just that it's almost like they've cheated their way into the playoff is the thing. They've been able to just write their own schedule. They wrote up the easiest schedule. I mean, their schedule was a write-in, and it's crazy that you see all these other commentators and all these other analysts online saying that, oh, well, Notre
They
Dame's
were
probably a
calling
write-in.
it that in
Like
the preseason.
that's not
Yeah,
good
we
then,
knew. Everybody
because
knew.
the reason I
Everybody
have a
knew.
problem with this is because even when Notre Dame has been a good team in the past, they've never been a great team. And what's happening is that you get a good team, a very solid Notre Dame team that writes their way into the playoffs or into the national championship, and then they play an elite team and they get ran. Notre Dame, I'm going to throw some statistics. Notre Dame is 61-17 in they've been outscored 61-17. Let me specify this. They've been outscored 61-17 in big games. They lost to Alabama
In
like
the play.
42-14 in the national championship in 2012. And then it's like and then they lost to Clemson. I think it was like 35-3 in the playoffs. And it's like, guess what? They were 11-1 going into that game against Clemson. Well, they're 11-1 now. Things are a little bit different because they're playing. It's funny is that the playoff committee knew what they were doing. They wrote it up the same way, where the team, which is Indiana, who's in the same boat as them, it's like, how good are they really? They haven't played true elite competition yet. That's what I find so confusing about Indiana, is that is the constant talk on Indiana, but no one's bringing that up with Notre Dame. Notre Dame has not played a
Because you're not allowed. You're
single
not allowed to
competitive
say.
team yet.
You're not allowed to say bad things about Notre Dame, as
They
we've
haven't played a
learned
single
ourselves.
competitive
But
team yet, except for Georgia Tech, and they beat up on them. But the thing is that, I remember I was watching some analysts talk about it, and they were talking about Notre Dame being how, oh well, Indiana. I actually think Indiana has a very high chance to beat Notre Dame, because Notre Dame, they talk about they're a good matchup for Indiana, and Indiana's bad because Indiana like relies so heavily on their pass game, and Notre Dame's third in the nation in pass yards allowed per game. Well, they've only played one passing offense in the top 30. That's even breaks the top 30. And they threw for which is USC, and they threw for 360 yards on them. USC's top 10. I think they might even actually be top 10 in passing offense, and they threw for 360 on Notre Dame. And if it wasn't for those two
well,
horrific pick sixes, then it would have been a much closer game. But overall, my final point is that the Notre Dame hate is given out because I think Notre Dame's getting away with something. Like, they're cheating the system pretty much. They're independent. I don't care. It's not about them being a good team or not. The fact is that even if they're a good team, they're not going through the hardships and crucible that these other teams have to go through, because they're not in a conference. They get to write their own schedule, and they're drawing up 4 group of 5 teams out of their 12 games, and then the other 8 are the most cupcake teams you could ever ask. You could ever say, like,
the
you know what I
the
mean?
bottom of the barrel of the
And
power
there's 2 ways this
conferences.
can
Yeah.
go for Notre Dame, is that you either end up being like Texas against Georgia in that first game, where the battle hardened team goes out and just whoops you because you just weren't ready for an elite team. Or it's the second thing, where Notre Dame gets lucky and they get away with it, and now they're going into the playoffs nice and healthy, and haven't had to face a real test that has tired them out. And then they're playing a Georgia team that's been through the gauntlet, had to play Texas twice and stuff. And it's just like, I just think that Notre Dame's getting away with too much, because, like I said, there's only 2 things they can have. They can either get lucky and
Well,
get
and
away
we've
with it
already.
in the playoffs,
Yeah.
or but that's my overall
And I mean, we've
thing, is
already
that
been
they're
down
just,
that rabbit
it's
hole. We're not going to
unfair.
repeat what we've already said, but we're just leveling the playing field just so there's nothing lost in translation. We believe Notre Dame's a good team, and we don't necessarily disagree with them being in the 12-team field, do we think that they shouldn't be number 7? Probably. But we don't know how good Notre Dame is. And maybe there's some historical bias involved. Okay, yeah, we admit there's some historical bias involved. But I mean, because they're independent and because they schedule this, they have the same like scheduling strategy every year. We see the same pattern every time. It's like, what else are we supposed to believe? We see it
Right. Like
every time.
you
So
talk about
until they prove us
history,
otherwise, we're going to feel this way. Yeah.
talk about the historical bias, and it's like, yeah, maybe from 70, 80 years ago, but if you look at the past 25 years, Notre Dame has constantly been in a position where they just go, they make it far further in the season, and then they finally play an elite team and get crushed. And that's
And
kind of
that's what
my thing. It's
we're
like
going off of
until
their
that
more
changes.
modern run.
And
Yes.
I hope Marcus
But
Freeman and and it's like I've never, my hatred with Notre Dame has never been that I just dislike the school or anything. It's just with the
we're
situation.
talking too much
I've
about
been,
Notre Dame.
but anyways, yeah. So that's the biggest thing is I think that we should like I think Notre Dame should stop getting away with an independent schedule because they just wrote themselves in. So now I guess we can go on to
Well,
our next topic.
the committee is I don't think the committee is going to stop them. Like I said, I already said what I believe. I think if you're not in a conference, you're not eligible for the playoff. I think that will bypass that issue, but they're not going to do that because, as someone has mentioned before, Notre Dame has influence. They're involved in the panel, and they're one of the baby girls of the NCAA. So they're not going to,
I'll tell
they're
you
going
this,
to let them do what they want.
I'd rather Notre Dame in the playoffs than Bama, though. I will say that because at
And
least
you
Notre
know what?
Dame
And
didn't
yep,
get
I'll
absolutely
say that.
crushed by
Yeah,
Oklahoma. But
I think
anyways,
I'll take Notre Dame in the playoffs over Alabama. I think they deserve it more than Alabama. So do with that what you will, Notre Dame fans.
sorry, I just had to get a little
But
bit of
anyway,
Bama hate in there real quick. Anyways,
I guess we need to move on to the playoff, like the actual playoff reaction. So, uh, as far as the final 12 team selection for the playoff, I'm content. I think I think the picks were pretty decent. I think we got some pretty good picks
I think with the
for the
field
most
that we
part.
had, I think the picks were pretty. I think they were fine. I mean, I'm with most everybody else. I agree that the auto bid is dumb because yeah, the fact that we have Arizona State on a bye is just crazy to me. And then you've got, I mean, it's like every other analyst, and we can all agree with this. I mean, look at Penn State. They're the loser of the Big Ten. They're the runner-up. They lost the Big Ten championship, and they've got half as difficult of a path to the Natty than Oregon does, and they won their conference. I get like Georgia. I think has like I mean, I wouldn't even say that like Georgia's is only an easier path, I'd say, than Texas because Texas just has to play one more game. But Texas, if they beat Clemson, they go and play Arizona State. Granted, I will say this: Texas struggles against very smart running backs, and so I think Arizona State is a better matchup for Texas than people think. I really do. I think Cam
I think
Scatabo can
Clemson
get some
falls in that
movement.
category too.
Exactly. That's another thing. So that's where we actually think that I think these are all good matchups. Notre Dame, they're a bit one-dimensional. Um, they don't really have much of a passing game. Indiana, I think, is a pretty well-rounded defense, and they got a really good passing game. And Notre Dame's only good passing team that they've played threw a lot on them. So I think Indiana has the opportunity to really make this a game. I don't know why they're favored. I don't know why Notre Dame's favored by a
Well,
whole touchdown. I
and
disagree
we're
with
gonna
that.
make and that's something we should talk about is, and because we're gonna make a picks and previews like for the upcoming games. We're gonna try our best to get a predictions episode, like a preview, uh, hopefully tomorrow. But yeah, like the favors, like the what do you call it? The line for these games is kind of crazy. It's
Well,
weird.
I honestly the Penn State and the Penn State and SMU one, I could be I'm okay with like -8 or -7. I but maybe at the same time, I don't know. I don't think Penn State's offense is electric enough. I really don't. And I know they dropped a bunch
I
on
think
Oregon, but I
SMU is
really,
better than people think they are. People like
I'm
SMU is one
really,
of the
I'm
best
really
teams in the
curious to
country.
see because there's a
Say
lot
what
of
you want.
parity. There's a lot more parity this season, and so a lot of people are saying these are terrible matchups. But there were a lot of matchups that people thought were terrible this
Yeah,
season that ended up
exactly.
being pretty like good games or close games. So I mean,
I tell you right now, we got some
nobody
good.
thought
This
nobody thought Vanderbilt was going to even be in contention with any of the teams that were on their schedule, and they keep it a 3-point game to Texas, and they beat Bama. So anything go. This season's been very, very close to parallel with 2007. Not quite 2007, but it's been close. I think there's more parity. I think people just need to be prepared for more shocks, a lot more shockers this playoff. I'm going to be real. Let's bring up Texas and Clemson. I really think Clemson is a much better matchup for Texas than people think. I know people keep because I've heard an argument that Clemson has to be a big play. They're a big play team and they have to make big plays, and you can't get that on Texas. But I think people forget that Clemson also has one of the best running backs. Maffa is very good. He's a very good running back. And Texas has struggled. The best run game they've played, they struggled against in Georgia. And Trevor Etienne and Moffa are very similar runners. And Etienne, I don't know what it is. It's just that style of running. He's got that just digs deep and can just really beat Texas up. And I think Moffa has a chance to do the same. Also, people are really sleeping on Cade Klubnik. Dude's stats are off the hizza. Like, I mean, the dude he's like 33 touchdowns and 5 picks, almost 4,000 passing yards. He's like
I mean, I already
67%. The
said
dude has played out of his mind.
I already said early on that I thought Cade Klubnik was one of the best QBs in the country, and I stand by that. Why? If you watch him play, you can tell. Like you can, he's one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country and one of the
I
most
wouldn't be
refined.
surprised. I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson came out, and I'm not giving a prediction. I'm just like giving sort of my feeling and why I think that it's actually not a bad matchup. Is I think Clemson can, if they can come out and really run the rock with Maffa, which I think they can. I think that they're able to establish that early, and it opens up the door for Cade Klubnik. And I think we have a bit of not a high scoring shootout, but like a back and forth, pop to the mouth kind of game. And I'm going to be real with you. I don't know if Texas has the capacity to win a game like that. So, but I'll save that.
We're
That kind of gives.
previewing. We're getting a little too much into previews of
There is
these
something I
games.
want to say though, talking about this that kind of goes in line with my name is that I also don't understand. Like that's my thing is that it's also the Texas Glaze. I don't know why they're favored by so much. I mean, I get that we talk about the matchups, but I really don't think it's as crazy imbalanced of a matchup as people are saying. And also, I don't get this Texas hype. Their offense is not that great. Both great. The two top level defenses they've played, they couldn't break 20 points. I think they scored
Right.
19. That was, or they scored 19 on Georgia, and they needed an overtime to do that. So I just don't think that Texas's offense is all that great. And people can say what they want to about Arch Manning. I disagree. I don't think Arch Manning comes in here and produces any more than what Quinn Ewers does because Manning is nowhere near as experienced as Ewers. I disagree.
And he's not, and he's not. They treat him as if he's just some kind of you know break the game dual threat. He's not.
And
He's
also,
not
I think
like
in past episodes, I may have accidentally called him a true freshman. He is a redshirt freshman, but before going into this season, he had played in like 2 games as like when they were up by like 35 points. So, he has no big game experience. And I don't see where people get this idea that he's going to walk into the playoff game and just play out of his mind and be the best quarterback of all time. It's just not
I
going to
mean the
happen.
Texas.
I
Well,
think it's just coping, but it's just Texas cope but, it's like I'm sorry, Arch Manning was put in against Georgia in that first game and it made no difference. And I think that's how it's going to go for any game this season. It just isn't going to make a difference.
I mean,
So
Ewers gives them their best chance, and Sark knows that. I mean, Ewers is the most
exactly
experienced quarterback. He's the more proven quarterback in terms of just passing and being a quarterback in general. People get this idea. I think it's just the hype behind Arch Manning being a Manning,
that.
and then they got this for some reason. They got this idea that Arch Manning's like the next Lamar Jackson or something. Like, where are you people getting this from? He's not. Arch Manning's legs aren't making the difference against a team like Georgia. He's not that guy. He's not that guy. He hasn't proven that anyway.
I
Arch Manning's
promise you,
not
he's
that guy.
not going out there and he's not
Not
outrunning an
outrunning the
elite
Georgia
linebacker.
defense. He's not. He's not
He's not
outrunning elite
outrunning an
defenses. He's
elite
not.
linebacker. He's just not, because people forget how fast some of these linebackers actually are. Some of these D ends. He's not outrunning any of them.
Right.
And that's what
The
killed
Texas
Arch Manning in the
Glaze.
first game. Was we had a spy, or Georgia had a spy on Arch Manning, and that's why he had one good run, and then right after that, I think he got sacked and fumbled. So Texas's O line is very vulnerable to strong, fast defensive lines. Hence Georgia's, and Clemson has one of
I mean,
those.
Texas's O
So,
line just isn't a match for
but
elite D lines. Just plain and
not
simple.
even talking about them being favored 11.5 over Clemson. They'd also be favored against Georgia again. And that's where I start to draw the line on this Texas Glaze. In what world they've lost twice and they've been handled twice? They've been handled once and they lost outright the second time in an overtime. Like, where do we get, like, and they're still favored by the same they were, 2.5. They're still favored by 2.5. So I could understand maybe favoring them by maybe a point now, maybe dropping that favor, but to favor them the same as you did before the SEC championship is out of this world. I don't get it. And the same argument was, oh, it's Steve Sarkisian. He's so smart. He's so smart. He's not going to let it happen again. I don't think people realize what just happened in this last game. Sure, the turnovers weren't as bad. You still turned the ball over twice. But that's still only half of what you did the first game. But also, we keep glazing Steve Sarkisian, and he's not going to let it happen again or whatever against Georgia. Well, it was Kirby Smart, and guess what? It happened again. They got sacked 6 times again. They got 5 more tackles for loss against them, and then they also had 2 picks. Like, the same thing happened. Held to 1.1 yards per carry. That's what I'm trying to say, is that stop. Steve Sarkisian has not proven he's the greatest coach in the country right now, because he's lost to the greatest coach in the country right now twice. So I don't get why we're so high on Texas. Texas is very vulnerable because they lost to a vulnerable Georgia team. I agree. Georgia is vulnerable this year. They've shown it. They've lost bad once and they've lost close once as well. So I just don't understand the Texas Glaze. I just don't think they're as good as people claim, because, again, it's almost like the Notre Dame argument. Texas has went through a pretty straightforward, easy schedule, and the only 2 good teams they played, I'd say, are Texas A&M and Georgia. And the Texas A&M one, they couldn't break 17 points. They looked terrible offensively, and then they also lost to Georgia both times. So the only 3, like, I agree, Texas's defense is elite. They've shown it. They held Georgia to 22 points, and they held Georgia to only 1 long drive in that first game. So I think they
That's
definitely
Texas's
have an
being
elite
carried. They
defense,
have an elite defense. They have
but
a
their
top
offense is
defense,
not elite, and I
and
don't
that's
think
what's
their coaching is
carrying.
elite. I don't
That's
think
what's carrying Texas.
I don't think their O
And
line's elite. That's the big thing. I don't think they have an elite O line. Everybody was so high
no,
on their O
of
line.
course
I
not.
think that's their weakness. Because
Well, Georgia exposed
I was
that
about to say
twice.
the best D line they've played all year, and Georgia's not even like upper echelon. Like, they're not even elite statistically this season, and they're just, it's a Kirby Smart defensive front. So no matter
I mean,
what, it's going to
they're
be
a top
solid.
defense, top
So
talent
you're
defensive
playing,
front, but
you've played them and you've lost. You've lost, and you've gotten, man, it's 13 sacks over 2 games. It's more than some teams have on the year against that good team. 25 tackles for loss total between both games. Maybe it's just because Georgia's just a really bad matchup for like Texas is just a really bad matchup for Georgia. Like, Georgia just has Texas's number, but the fact that Georgia's the only good, like, team, like, really good team, like, comparison we have for Texas, that's why I don't get why everybody's so high on Texas. I think it's just, again, Notre Dame brand bias. They're 11-2. They've gotten the dubs, but they've played the easiest schedule ever. And because of that, they played the easiest schedule ever, went and fought a battle hardened, really tough, just, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, really, a Georgia team that's really grown into their skin or whatever. They played them in the SEC championship, and they just weren't ready
Kirby
again.
Smart led the best
Yeah,
coach in
Kirby
the
Smart led
country.
to, and that was
They
my
seem to
biggest
keep
issue.
forgetting that. You people seem to keep forgetting Kirby Smart's the best coach in the country.
And that's
Like,
my thing, is I
who
think
is Steve
alone,
Sarkisian to Kirby Smart?
I think with Vegas, I
Legitimate
think
question.
if you're gonna take, like, that's my issue. Why are we taking Texas as the favorite? I could understand maybe, like, maybe -1 talent wise, but I think Kirby Smart tips the scales. I think if I'm if I'm betting on this game, I'm betting
The
Georgia.
coaching,
First
the
of all,
better
because they've
coach
won
makes the
twice.
difference in a game like
Second of
that.
all,
Yeah.
because just the better coaching, and it's been proven already. So because that was the argument. Oh, Steve Sarkisian's not going to let the same thing happen again. They're going to run the ball better now. Nope. They actually, it's actually crazy that people made that argument, and then they literally ran for the exact same yards per carry as last game, and
I mean,
almost had the exact same sacks. It just
Georgia's D line owns Texas. Texas has an elite defense that has carried them to this point in the season, and Georgia could make somewhat of a similar
so
argument. Georgia has a lot going on there, and I mean that's a conversation for another day. But
that's my
Texas
argument.
is
It's the
Texas
favorite.
is is the committee and the NCAA's baby girl this year for some reason. Sports media's baby girl, Vegas's baby girl. I don't know what it is about Texas this year. They
McConaughey,
haven't
man.
they haven't proven anything, and they're not even the most talented team in the country. I think Ohio State is the most talented team in the country, but it's like you're not
I
the
think,
most
yeah, I mean, I
talented
agree.
team in the country.
I think Oregon and Ohio State are both more talented than
You're not the
Texas.
most
But
talented. I think Ohio State's the most talented on both sides of the ball anyway.
yeah,
You're not the most talented team in the country. You don't have the best coach in the country, and you lost twice to the same playoff caliber team. And other than that, played a pretty mid schedule. Like, I don't understand, where does the Texas Glaze come from? Probably because they're the richest school in the country and they're a big brand. That, you
I mean,
know,
yeah,
is
and
what it is.
Texas
But
fans, if you're watching this, uh, like we're venting now because as Georgia fans, it just
and we need
doesn't.
to cut that because we're already
But
over time.
it's just I guess it's like it's just weird and confusing for like Georgia to beat them twice and then to be favored a third time,
It's psychotic.
all
The
3 times.
Texas narrative
Doesn't
has
make
been
any sense to
psychotic. I'm just
me.
going to be straight
And
up. It's insane. It's insanity.
like what's funny to me is that I could understand, like I get it, like it would be the third time you play, and it's like it's already hard enough to beat a team twice. I can't imagine how hard it would be to beat a team 3 times. But I think by logic, I think you got to pick the team that's already won twice. Like that's the team you pick. But um, anyways, to finish this whole thing, I think that the Clemson spread should be closer. I think it should be a closer spread because Clemson's going to be the probably second best D line, second or third best D line that Texas will have played.
And
And
offense.
I was about to say,
Probably
it's
the best
I was
offense
going to
they
say, I
played
think it's the
all
best offense
season.
they've played. I'd probably,
So their
I don't think
defense will really be tested
Georgia,
this
I
year.
think, is the best rushing attack they've played, but I think Clemson is the most complete offense they will have
I mean,
played this
that's even
season.
arguable. That's even arguable with
So yeah,
Clemson
I
and
agree.
Rafa. So,
But I think it's the difference is that Georgia's shown that they've already shown they can run on Tech. They've ran all over Texas both times. So,
well, anyway,
but I think it should be closer. I think it's a way better matchup than people are giving it.
we'll cover
So
that all that in the preview, like the
yeah.
specifics in the
So,
preview. But
but I
in
think
general,
yeah. So that's my thing. I think we talked. So we talked about the flip of the Big Ten, about how like Penn State has a way easier like road than Oregon, even though
and
Oregon
I mean
won.
that's a technicality because it's the thing is that some of these teams they're trying not to get certain rematches. They don't want conference championship rematches in the playoff. So just by technicality, these teams like Texas got put where they are, Georgia got put where they are, and Oregon and Penn State got put
I
where they
mean,
are
you can still
respectively.
achieve that without
Um,
like you can still achieve that by making it more. I mean, you still just flip the teams. That's the thing. You literally can just flip Oregon and Penn State right now, and boom, like or reseed. That's something that they
well, you can
could be
it's
considered in the
based on
future.
it's based on the it was based on the rankings, so it was just inherent from where the rankings stood, where these teams ended up. So with especially with the auto bids. So, but as far as the playoff selection, I think for the most part we got a good. First of all, let me just say I think we got a good 12-team field this year. I think the first ever 12-team playoff I think is going to be a damn good one because round one. Let me tell you something. It's like you touched on earlier, Texas Donuts. Uh, round one is going to go crazy. Like I think all of these are going to be good games. I think we've got good matchups all across the board.
I think so.
Texas
I
and
know.
Clemson, Texas and Clemson, and Ohio State and Tennessee are probably going to be field goal games. We'll talk more about that later.
You know.
Notre Dame and Indiana, that's an in-state battle, between two schools that we don't even know who's who yet. And I think that's
Exactly.
important to talk about too. Penn State versus SMU. Look, man, y'all can say what you want about SMU, but they deserve to be in this playoff, and Penn State's got their work cut out for them.
It's an electric
I mean,
offense they're playing, so it's
I
going to
think
really put Penn State's defense to the test. So I think
I
it's the
think the
second
top,
best offense they've played.
and I think we've got like I think the 12-team field looks good this year. I mean, I'm content. I don't really have any quarrels, truthfully. I don't really have any hard arguments for it. I think we got a good 12-team field. For the most part, I think we got the 12 best teams in the country. Now we'll go on to like possible, potential snub conversation next. But the top four seeds, I think Oregon and Georgia, that's a gimme. I think Boise State earned their seed. Whatever. Let's see what they do. Arizona State, people are a little upset about Arizona State, but because the auto bids and how they got the top four seed. But I mean, okay, yeah, the Big 12 wasn't nothing this year, but Arizona State, they played their hearts out. They're a good team. I mean, if they're really
Yeah,
up
but
to
we
the
talk about
challenge,
difference there. They also blew the doors off of their opponent in the conference championship
yeah,
too.
and that's another
So
important thing to consider.
I
So,
guess, but the way I want to look at this is that I just think
but
the
I mean,
auto
that's
bids
an
in general is
example of a
bad.
bad matchup, though. That was an example of a bad matchup because I knew what was going to happen. Iowa State has a terrible run defense. You
Yeah,
don't play Arizona State and Cam Scatabo and with one of the worst rushing
yeah.
defenses in the country. Like it's not going to work out for you. So that was a matchup thing, more or less. But either way, I think Arizona State earned their spot. I think all of these teams, for the most part, earned their spot. Now,
I think the thing is that I've said it before is that do I think that maybe here's the thing, because I think you have to look at the playoff as a combination of deserving and best. Because the thing is that there's a difference between like, okay, we just know you're better than you showing you're better. And that's sort of the argument with SMU and Bama. It's like, do I think that Bama is potentially a better team than SMU? Sure, they're a big dog in the SEC. You can say
talent
that all
wise,
day.
maybe
Talent
across the
wise, of course.
board, the
Do I
roster,
think that
maybe.
Alabama could put together a game much better than SMU if their talent comes together? Yes, just like Oklahoma did against them. But that's kind of the point is like SMU just doesn't have, you know, we always get lost in translation with like wins and losses, which ones are worth more. Oh, well, they beat Georgia and Georgia's number 2 seed. It's like, yes, but you can't ignore the 3 losses that they have. And one of them's Vanderbilt, which Vanderbilt's a good team, but they're
We
still
can't,
not
and look,
great.
we can't keep suckling the teat of that fluke Georgia win. I'm sorry, we all know it was a fluke at this point,
Well, there's that, but also like,
and you
and
can't
then
just
and then
use
you,
that
you got
one
you got
win. That's like
absolutely
okay,
hammered by Oklahoma.
then Oklahoma should be in because they hammered you, even though they're 6-6. You can't use one win. It's one win
Losses, that's what I'm saying.
isn't the
Losses
doesn't
have to
define the
matter.
whole
They have
season.
wins matter, but losses have to matter. And Bama has way worse
Just
losses
as
than
one loss,
SMU. They
right?
just do.
Just as one loss doesn't mean everything. Like with NIU and Notre Dame, one win doesn't mean everything. You got lucky and
Right.
got a fluke win against Georgia, but that the rest of your season, SMU was a consistently better season, a better team that put together a better season than
They
Alabama at the
finished
end of the
eleven
day.
and one, and
That's
Bama
that.
finished 9-3. I know
And they
Bama's got a harder
handily
schedule, but
SMU SMU handily beat every single opponent they played, and they almost came back and beat Clemson in the conference championship. They made it a field goal game
and they
against
lost
Clemson.
by what,
So
like 1 or 2 points to BYU, who, was like top of like up there, like
which
third in
and
the
that was
conference or
way
something.
that was way early in the season, and I think that was another one of those one-off games like Georgia and Alabama. But
But I
so
think the overall thing we're saying is that I think we're happy for the most part with the playoff choices. I just think that the auto bids kind of screw the positions. I think Arizona State belongs in the playoff. I just don't think they belong at number 4.
I mean, yeah,
Um,
number 4 top seed
Same
by
thing with
maybe
Boise
not,
State.
but
And I think it's more so we talk about because I think parity's there, and I think Arizona State and Boise State. This is the one season in out of the past 25 that they probably have the best chance at anything. But that's all assumption. If you go based on, we talk about Notre Dame and what's happened, we got to keep it consistent. Boise State and Arizona State in situations like this in the past would have gotten crushed. So you can't necessarily ignore that fact, and you got to go in with some fear that they will get crushed. So
I think it's possible. I think it's I think it's possible that four of these teams get embarrassed. That's a possibility.
one
But
thing I'm worried about
and
though is that bad games happen, and I always get upset because there becomes confirmation bias, because sometimes some
right.
teams just have bad
Sometimes
games.
those one-off games end up
Yeah.
happening in the playoff, and it kind of throws everything like
For
the
example,
narrative
like the
off.
Michigan and Georgia playoff where Georgia just absolutely boat raced Michigan. I actually don't think Michigan was a bad team, and I think they belonged in the playoffs. It was just a bad matchup, really bad
It was a bad
matchup.
matchup, of
Tough,
course,
tough. It was just
but
not, just wasn't right. It didn't fall in place correctly for Michigan, just like, it hasn't before.
I think
So.
I think Notre Dame and Indiana, I think they've earned their spots, but I think as we talked before, I think Notre Dame and Indiana are the most questionable teams in this playoff field. And this
Well,
is
Notre
not to
Dame's
hate this is not to hate on the state of Indiana. We've already talked about Notre Dame,
they've
but
earned their spot, but that's because it was easy to earn. They made it
we
easy to
don't
earn, but
and
we talked about
Indiana,
that.
it was kind of the same for Indiana because the only top team, the only ranked team they played, granted it was Ohio State, but if you can't keep up with the big dogs, then maybe you're not top 12 in the country. And that's a big point to make, especially in a season with more parity. But one off games, Indiana, it's like we talked with Texas. Texas got caught sleepwalking by an elite team and got embarrassed. They came around second go round because they were a little more battle hardened and got their stuff together, but also they had the rematch advantage. Indiana, that game at Ohio State made them more battle hardened. So
Right.
they
I
still
don't think Kurt Signetti lets that happen again. I
I
don't.
think Notre Dame and Indiana are the most speculative teams, and maybe Boise State too. I think maybe those are the three most speculative teams in the playoff, but they deserve the spots more or less, like we said. So
You know what's so crazy? It's such an interesting outcome that can happen here, because you're learning so much just from that small bracket down there, that small section with Notre Dame and Indiana. Because the thing is that if Indiana goes in there and gets absolutely crushed by Notre Dame or vice versa, then it's like, okay, one of those teams is elite and we knew the other one, and looks like the other one, their schedule got the best of them and it was two. But what happens if they both go and it's like a field goal game?
I mean,
And
if
it's
we don't,
like
it could. I mean, either way,
30 to
you.
27, then guess what? Then you're playing well, I want to say historically elite, but recently very elite team. You're going to play in Georgia. And so then it's like the mask is going to come off there. It's like, okay, so if Indiana and Notre Dame get it, they have a very close game, a field goal game, then it's like, okay, you still don't know. You're like, okay, maybe they're either both were meant for the playoffs, or maybe they just both are mid, like not great team, not elite teams, and they
I
just had a good
think
game. And then you play Georgia, and then you got to prove, okay, if you're elite or not. So because
I
I
think
know, I get
Notre.
it, Georgia doesn't have their starting quarterback, but Gunnar Stockton is a very highly rated recruit, and also
He's a talented player,
you're
and
you're
we,
you're still playing the Georgia defense.
and we'll
So
talk about that in the preview for the game when it comes time. But I do think Notre Dame has a I think they have a better chance against Georgia than Indiana, just matchup
I
wise,
agree.
mainly in the trenches. But that's something for
Yeah,
another
for
day.
sure. But well, there's that, and then I will say, I just don't see potential other than like just your usual one-off blowout type of games. I don't see potential for like a flat out blowout just because one team's just way better than the other.
No, look at these matchups. Like I said, this is one of the. I'm happy with the first year of the expanded playoff. I'm actually happy with the way the bracket turned out. I'm happy with it because I think these matchups, round one, as I said before, is going to go crazy, and I don't think people understand how crazy it's going to go because we got really good matchups. SMU and Penn State, that's a good matchup. Make no mistake. Texas and Clemson, and Ohio State and Tennessee, some of the best playoff matchups
Oh,
you're probably ever
The
going to
Ohio
see.
State Tennessee game, I'm so ready for. That game's going to go so
That
crazy
game
because it's just two
probably going to
elite
be one of the best
defenses.
playoff games.
It's
Right,
two really good defenses just going at each
right.
other's throats, man. And then you got Will Howard, who I don't think is the greatest fit for Ohio State's um, offensive system, and then you've got Nico Iamaleava, a true freshman, playing in the playoffs his first season. So it's like
That's
a
going to be
redshirt. I can't
crazy.
remember if he's a redshirt or true freshman, but I think he's true. But I think you're really going to see, because that's one of those games that it's just going to be. I think that game is 100% dependent upon which quarterback clicks first.
No, yeah,
I
that's
think
going to be
whichever quarterback
quarterback. The
can click,
quarterback is going to determine that
and then
game.
if they both click, bro, that game's going to be
We're going to
on
get it. We're going
another
to get an
level.
instant classic with
So
that matchup. We're going to get an instant
I'm so
classic.
excited for that game. I think the Indiana Notre Dame game is going to be fantastic. I'm with you. I think SMU and Penn State's going to be a great game, because
And think about this. And you
what's
know
funny
what?
is that it's a real test for, it's a really big test. It's another huge test, like with
For
Oregon's
both
offense,
teams,
for Penn State's defense, and SMU. And Penn State's offense is terrible, but SMU doesn't have the greatest defense in the world. They have a solid defense, and now we're going to get to see, okay, because what SMU should be able to keep Penn State to like 20 points or
well,
like
Penn State's
24.
offense
Like,
isn't terrible, but
so,
they're pretty mid. They have a good running game. Um,
and I think I'm sorry, and I think Oregon's defense just got a little bit of an exposure in that Big Ten
no,
championship. I really just think
Oregon's
their defense
defense.
isn't as great as
Boise
we thought.
State, Boise
Yeah,
State
Boise State did
exposed
put
Oregon's
what, like
defense, and
20
ever since
something on
then,
them, 27.
my gut has been telling me ever since then, Oregon's defense, they may be number one in the country, but they're not the best on both sides of the ball. Oregon most certainly and we can go into like the who's who. Uh, Oregon definitely has the best offense in the country, and that's what's allowed them to. They always find a way to outscore their opponent. They're the best offense in the country, hands down. I give that to Oregon. Um, no defense has been able to stop them yet, and that's why they're undefeated. But their
But they did
defense,
let Ohio State drop 31, and then Michigan turned around in Columbus and held them to 10. So you wonder,
Ohio State and
you know,
Boise State, and then Penn State exposed a consistent pattern here
so
and confirmed what I was thinking the whole season. Oregon's defense is not elite. They're not all that. And the second Oregon plays a team that can stop their offense, that has a good enough offense to follow it up, complementary football, they're probably
that's
going to
why I
lose.
think
But
Tennessee
we'll
and
talk
Ohio,
about that,
either Tennessee or
later.
Ohio State, are a fantastic matchup for Oregon in a neutral site, because that's the difference. Because now we're going to see how much of a difference did Eugene make between Oregon and
If they
Ohio
play
State,
Ohio State
because
again,
they'll be
right?
playing in a neutral site if they rematch. So um, this, I think, is a good. These are the kind of rematches that I think are good, because you've got a home game rematch and now you've got a neutral site rematch. So now you can tell, okay, what makes did the home game, did Eugene make the difference, or did neutral site make the difference? And that's something I want to transition into, and maybe we can make this the last thing we talk about.
Well, let's talk about the because we were going to talk about the possible snubs. Were there any potential snubs? We're not going to mention Bama and Miami because we already talked about this. There's nothing more to say
You
about
can't
it.
tell
And
me
neither,
you can't tell me you can't tell me Miami in any way is better than any of the teams in the top 12 right now.
right,
Don't need me.
neither Alabama nor Miami
I don't
deserve
think you
to
can
be in
argue
that
for that,
playoff.
because you can say what you want
Neither of
to
those
about
teams are top 12. They're not.
but the only good defense they played, or only solid defense they played, was Georgia Tech, and they were held to what, 24,
They
something like that,
lost.
23, and they lost. So their
They
defense
got
is
a decent. They get.
atrocious. Defense is atrocious. They've played some of the worst offenses in the country and still allowed over 30 points a game. It was
They're an
atrocious.
average
So Miami
team.
doesn't belong.
They're an
And
average team that happened to go 10-2. They don't deserve to be in the playoffs. To get Miami Cope,
Bama
Alabama Cope. They're not one of the 12
Bama
best
has
teams in the
three
country.
losses,
Maybe one
talented,
of the 12 most talented,
but three
but not
losses
one of the
with
12
one of the
best
worst
teams.
losses in the country. So sorry, that's why Bama's out. Uh,
You don't deserve it.
funny,
But
funny
if
enough,
anybody got
because
snubbed, who do we think got snubbed potentially? If
I
there's an
think
argument for that.
I think if you're going to look at that, because there's the triangle, there's the love triangle there, of Copers with South Carolina, Bama, and Ole Miss, of course. I think out of those three teams, Ole Miss was definitely the one that probably got snubbed. I think Ole Miss legitimately was a very good team and was in that 12. And the thing is I know we talk about like head to head isn't all that. And I think maybe South Carolina's probably inching their way up to being better than Ole Miss at this point. But they had a pretty recent matchup, and Ole Miss just blew the brakes off of South Carolina. So I just don't see how you can. I think if we're going to put that much weight on the 24-3 loss for Oklahoma, you got to put a lot of weight on the 27-6 loss for South Carolina to Ole
Well,
Miss.
eh,
So
yeah, and the thing is once again we've talked about, head to head's not the be all end all. We've talked about that before. Head to head can be very circumstantial, one off games, all kinds of stuff. But the head to head is like the third step, like in a tiebreaker. Head to head's like step three. Okay, so you have a team, their win loss record is the same, right? Okay, their win loss record is the same. Next test, strength of schedule, strength of record. Okay, did they have comparable strength of schedule, strength of competition, comparable strength of record? Because even that still comes before the head to head. Okay, they've got a comparable win loss record, they've got a comparable strength of schedule and strength of wins and whatnot. Uh, although Ole Miss definitely has the better win, the best win out of the two.
the
And
problem
then
with
you have, then if you got comparables, those two comparable steps in the ladder, then head to head is like step three. Okay, the tiebreaker between two teams with the same win loss record, comparable strength of schedule is the head to head. Okay, well, who won that head to head? The head to head is like step three. So, I mean, looking back, I think either Ole Miss, I think both Ole Miss and South Carolina have an argument for the playoff. And
I think South
honestly,
Carolina, funny enough, let's say this because maybe we've talked about this before, but South Carolina definitely, I think, belongs over Bama, even with the head-to-head, because you
yeah,
mentioned the
we
three
did
steps.
talk about it.
South Carolina, they barely lost the head-to-head in the first place. Should have had they should have played it safer, but Sellers just decided to chuck it down the field and get it picked. But I digress on that. You made a mistake. You lost the game. That's how it goes. But South Carolina just has nowhere near as bad of losses as Bama. And uh, Ole Miss, though, has the better win, the Georgia win, and has, but they have the Kentucky loss, which is bad. And that was at
That's
home.
the thing. Technically,
So,
South Carolina still has a better strength of altogether. South Carolina has the better strength of record. Technically, now they
but
both lost to LSU. South Carolina should have won that game. That's a
they
whole nother
got,
conversation.
but I
I
think
mean,
that's where we should sit with like snubs. I think really
yeah, I
potential
mean the only
snubs are
teams,
Ole Miss and South Carolina
right?
to
Ole Miss and
us,
South
I think.
Carolina.
And I don't even really see that as a big deal for snub because I'm not upset that SMU got it in above them. Could you have put him in there and I'd be okay with that? Sure, but
I think the
I'm
argument
pretty
comes
content
with
with this playoff.
well,
So
I think the argument comes, and jumping back into the hate pot. I think the argument for where the potential snubbed teams go, I think if you took Notre Dame and Indiana out and put Ole Miss and South Carolina in, or exchanged one between Ole Miss and South Carolina with one between Indiana and Notre Dame, I think that would be like where that balance lies. That would be the slots where the snub would happen. I'm not going to say anything definitive because I think I'm happy and content with the 12-team field. And I'm not trying to, just single out and hate on the Indiana teams. I think they are in their spots. Um, we'll see what happens. But if we were to talk about potential snubs, I think Indiana and Notre Dame over
mhm.
Ole Miss or South Carolina. I think those four teams, that's where that potential snub factor
All
comes
right.
in. So
Well, I think that's probably so. That's our overall take on the playoff. We're pretty content with
we
it.
got a
But
good playoff,
you
guys.
got to do
We
that.
got a
I
good
think it's going
playoff.
to be a good playoff. I don't think we have any games that are ran away with. And if they do get ran away with, there's something you got to look at. Look out for turnovers. If you have a game that's super lopsided, but there's like 5 turnovers, then that's one of those games where you just I think it's like one of those games where that's one of those breakdown games where one team just didn't they just didn't come prepared like they should have, and it's just one of those one-off games,
I
because
mean, it
we are
happens,
these
but
are still college students. They're right after, half these
right.
teams are training for these games while also taking finals and stuff.
Hell,
So
I mean, even the NFL, you get one-off bad games. So I mean,
so
it's a
we'll
good playoff. We expect
I
good
think it's a
good
good
games, good
playoff,
matchups.
and I don't see any lopsided games to be honest. Funny enough, probably until maybe second round, where I do think that maybe Arizona State and Boise State have potential for that.
Right.
But
Because those are
may
two of those teams we talked about earlier.
right about how like historically they've never stood a chance, but maybe with the way the season's played out, maybe there's enough parity. So I think I'm in the middle. I think that I think this is the first playoff. It's a learning curve. I think if Arizona State and Boise State both get just boat raced, then I think you learned your lesson and you're like, okay, we probably need to get rid of auto bids, because this is what, 2 years. This goes for next season as well, and then they're changing it up again. So this is just experimental. We'll see if these auto bids are just, because you never know. What if we end up having like the greatest playoff of all time here? Like what if it ends up being fantastic and we get
They'll
some of the
stick to
greatest
this
games we've ever seen?
format,
It's like,
and that
maybe it's
might
not a
be
terrible
good.
idea.
That might be good for everybody, because that might cause the committee in the NCAA to give a little bit more pushback against the SEC Big Ten Super League takeover, because I honestly don't want to see that. As much as people may see us as SEC homers, and I guess we are, I still want college football to be as close to traditional college football as possible. I think the conference is still a good thing. I don't want to see college football turn into amateur NFL. I don't want to see
Yeah.
that. Like, I don't want to see SEC
Yeah.
Big Ten Super League
I
take
don't
over.
want to see
I don't want to see
AFC and
that.
NFC
Yeah, I don't want to see that.
2.0. So, but
Now, do I think there should be more, like, better schedules? More like each conference team, like each team should play more of their own conference games and out of conference games. I think power conference teams should play more conference games and out of conference games, less FCS and group of five games. But then that's a hard argument, because, okay, well, if they play less group of five teams, it makes it harder to justify group of five teams in the conversation for playoffs. So,
yeah.
maybe
I just
less
think
FCS teams, but
that, and one more thing, Notre Dame join a conference, please. I think that's the very last.
you don't want to get hate speeched, then join a conference. Use joins the conference. Use gets
But
less as the hate.
I will say this. I will admit that I do believe that Notre Dame's a good team. And I want to say that because I already know that with my luck, I'm going to be eating the fattest crow ever. Because if you guys have watched this before, we've admitted multiple times that we were Georgia fans, and we've probably made it pretty obvious because sometimes we go on tangents like a bunch of stupid idiots. But I'm going to say this. I do think Notre Dame's a good team, and I think that they 100% can. I think that they can match up with Georgia just fine. And I want to say that now because with my luck, they'll go in there and like beat Georgia, and then I've got to eat the fattest crow of all time.
I
So,
think they're well, I agree. I think they're, even though I think Georgia's better, I think they're more talented. I think with Kirby Smart, I think Georgia could handle Notre Dame. But I also know, I believe Notre Dame is a good team. I think they're talented. Uh, we know they're good in the trenches, and that's the biggest difference between these teams like
yeah,
Georgia, is like, if you can keep up in the trenches, then you have the capability of putting
well,
up a fight,
yeah, that's
possibly
all.
winning.
That's things that we can talk about in our
But yeah, in the
next
previews,
show.
we got one more
All right.
thing we got to go over, though. So the path to the Natty, and this one can be a quick one. So, do we want to make a prediction before it all even starts? Do we want to predict who's going to be in the not who's going to win the national title game, but are we going to make a prediction on what the national title matchup is going to be?
I think we just do that when we do a playoff, like, because I think what we should just do is like we have to predict this first round of the playoffs anyways for like, so I think we should just save that for next episode.
Well, let's just give a ballpark figure. Let's just look over the bracket real quick and just say who
Well,
we think is the best
I'll
team.
shoot out mine. I think it's Georgia and Ohio State.
You think
I
Georgia
think
and Ohio
I think
State?
Georgia and Ohio State go to the because Georgia, I think that they, funny enough, have a fairly easy path. No hate. Again, I'm actually trying to give Notre Dame their flowers this time. I just think that out of like Ohio State and Penn State and Oregon, I think that Notre Dame's probably the easiest team out of like the big deal teams. So I think Georgia probably, because they have to play Notre Dame, and I think Notre Dame and Penn State are probably these. I think out of all the teams that they have to play, it's going to be either Notre Dame, Indiana, Penn State, or SMU. I think Georgia can handily beat all four of them. I think, funny enough, they have the most trouble with Notre Dame, but I think they still can beat Notre Dame. So I think Georgia makes it because I think they have, relative to the way that they match up to teams, the easiest path, or
Right.
one of the second easiest path. I think Clemson or Texas has the easiest path. Um, and then I just think that, with Ohio State, clock management's what screwed them in Eugene. So I think in a neutral site, I think Ohio State beats Oregon. I know they just lost to Michigan, but we talked about it. Rivalry games, baby. That's just how they go sometimes. So I think Michigan wanted to prove a point that day, and they did.
Right. We talked about that.
And that was, no matter how bad we are, don't count us out because we're your biggest rival. So yeah, but I think Ohio State is the most, like you said, I think they're the most talented overall on both sides of the ball. And I think it will be a crazy good matchup, because I think it'd be Georgia, who is one of the most talented, but the best coached. And then I think it's Ohio State, who is the most talented, but maybe not the best coach. So then it's like, okay, what wins? Pure talent or pure or best coaching, So I think that's going to be the national championship matchup, Georgia and Ohio State. I think Ohio State ends up beating Oregon.
I think that's within the realm that I was thinking. I think it's going to be between 4 teams ultimately to choose from, because we didn't really lay out the who's who. But I think Georgia, Tennessee, Oregon, and Ohio State are the 4 best teams in the playoff field. And I think it would be 2 out of those 4. And I honestly, we have potential for an all SEC national title game, Georgia versus Tennessee. But I'm going to narrow it down between Georgia, Ohio State, and Tennessee, because I think they're running out of luck here. And I don't want to say it that way, but I think with the matchups we got coming up, I think they're running out of luck. And I think Georgia, Ohio State, and Tennessee between those 3. And honestly, as you said, Georgia's path to the playoff is a little more clear to the title game. I'll take Georgia on one side. And between Ohio State and Tennessee, I'm just going to take the quarterback factor. The quarterback, I think, is what's going to define the game, make the difference. I'm just going to take the more experienced quarterback. But at the same time, it's kind of hard because I don't think Will Howard is a playoff caliber quarterback. I'm going to take the most talented team with the more experienced quarterback. And Ryan Day is more experienced in these situations than Josh Heupel as well. So I agree with you. I think Georgia and Ohio State is going to be the national title game this year. I think we're going to get another Georgia-Ohio State matchup.
Which is funny because that comes full circle, because at the very beginning of the season, I believe that was the
prediction for everybody, right?
National championship was Georgia and Ohio State. So, but I still think that they're just the best teams. I think Georgia, falls always in top 5 of talent, but number 1 in coaching, and Ohio State's number 1 in talent.
Arguably number 1 in talent, right?
So, I think
top 5 in coaching, it's arguable, but I think the coaching is good enough. I think it's good enough.
Ryan Day's shown that he can show up
right.
in a big game. I know people always say, "Oh, he can't beat Michigan." Yeah, but he did almost beat Georgia in a playoff game, like the best Georgia team, one of the best teams in the past decade. So he, granted, he did have C.J. Stroud, so he doesn't have C.J. Stroud anymore, but I think they're still talented. They're Ohio State. They always manage to bring a bunch of talent to the table. So we'll just have to see.
We'll see, but we're going to go with the
I don't know why we ever say anything about how long we try to make these episodes, because it's just never going to happen.
Well, you know what? The thing about it is I think I know where we messed up was talking about Notre Dame. We went a little too long on Notre Dame, and talking about Texas. Whenever we talk about like specific teams and have like rants to go on, we go down that rabbit hole. It was Texas and Notre Dame that threw us off. But
yeah, well, it's their fault. It's Texas and Notre Dame's fault.
It's their fault.
Get in the conference, Notre Dame, and Texas, be a better team. Win your big games.
But anyway, folks.
I'm sorry, Texas fans.
We still made under our average time, so I think we still did pretty good. If you watched all the way through to this point, You're a real
for
one. Thank
yep.
you. You are not broke at all.
I highly doubt a Notre Dame fan or Texas fan made it this far, but if you
Probably not.
did, you definitely a real one.
You're
You
the
know,
real McCoy.
ain't nothing like being able to fight through people just absolutely shitting on your team. So,
And guys, look, please continue to watch, subscribe if you like the channel and want to see more, hear more yapping and ranting and unga bunga. And keep up the engagement, man. We appreciate the engagement. I mean, it's football, no hard feelings, like trash talking, whatever. Well, let's
all the hard feelings in the world. I can't stand any of your opinions. No,
let's
no,
let's
we
have
love
fun with
the
it.
engagement. So, um, we do obviously because we're not super huge yet. It's pretty easy to go through and read the comments, and also we do what we can reading comments. And
And I mean, we don't
no.
we don't do this to be super huge anyway. This is for fun. This channel's for fun.
Obviously, there's no like we just
We don't
are
take this too
riffing.
seriously. I mean, we love college football and we're still objectively correct. But
Yeah,
we
I
don't
mean,
take it too
your incorrect opinions are always. We always want to hear your incorrect opinions so we can have a good laugh. But
right. You amuse us.
no, because also things, I think, you can learn plenty of things from, other people's opinions on stuff. Maybe you guys could say something about the Texas and Clemson matchup that maybe would change our opinions, because maybe there's something about Clemson that I haven't seen or Texas, because, there's 130 something teams in this division. So it's pretty hard to like really get every single tidbit of information that you need. So,
Yeah, and I'll put some chapters as usual on the podcast episode so that people can kind of sift through main points or main topics they want to. Maybe some disclaimers like, "Hey, we're ranting about
yeah,
Notre Dame here. Skip this part. We're ranting
yeah,
about
it's
Texas
like
here."
Irish and Longhorn triggers here.
Yeah. Um,
But
but yeah,
you know,
anyway, I mean, it's been at work. We hope to follow up with the playoffs with some previews and predictions for the playoff games because we really want to be a part of that. Because this is going to be a good playoff. This is going
we
to be a
think
good
so. We
playoff,
hope so. You never truly know. It's college football. 21. There's 20-year-olds out there, and the
and
consistency can happen. Sometimes a college football team can be about as consistent as we are. So
but we're professionally unprofessional, consistently
we are very
inconsistent.
consistently at staying over an hour on every episode, though. So
We're consistent on taking too long. Yes, we're consistent at yapping too much. Yes.
like we are right now.
Um,
Anyways, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching, and go ahead and flame us in the comments if you want.
Subscribe, throw some flame in the comment section. I mean, obviously, we can't go back and forth with everybody, and I mean, we're not gonna get in flame wars
Yeah,
with
we'll
people,
address
but
what we can in
you know,
videos.
and
Keep
respond
it civil, of course.
right, respond to civil comments and when we can, where we can, and anyway, but I hope you guys enjoyed today's episode. Please subscribe if you want to hear more yapping. And hopefully we'll be able to bring you guys some playoff prediction episodes
Also,
coming up for these games.
one more thing to say: Notre Dame and Texas fans, we do love you guys. No hard feelings. I just sometimes got to rant.
That is true. It's all about, hey man, that's all what college football is about. You guys are delusional, but we love you. But your
All
internet
right.
connection's about to crash out, so I guess we need to end it
Okay. Bye,
here.
guys.
All right. Well, you folks need to quit being broke. We can't wait for a good playoff. I ain't broke because I'm a man and I'm 40. But anyway, we hope to give you a round one previews and picks episode tomorrow. So be looking out for that. Please subscribe if you enjoyed, and Talk-Ons out. Have a good Tuesday.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Thank you.
Beamer ball.
Too much glaze, too much glaze, too much glaze.